As Provost of the Anglican Cathedral in Scotland's capital city, I want to begin by assuring you that we are acutely aware that the eyes of the world will be focused on the UK in November and on Glasgow and COP26 in particular. We are very conscious of the responsibility that comes with that we are welcoming the world to Glasgow, and there is a need to ensure the voices of those most affected by climate change are heard loud and strong, as we've heard this evening. And above all, that action flows from that gathering. The time is short and the need is pressing. We are busy organising events around COP26 to ensure that momentum is built up and that we are ready to hear the cry. We are hoping to pilgrimage from Edinburgh to Glasgow in the build-up to COP26, for instance, in the company of all those thinking creatively and sustainably how we might organise our common life. But that pilgrimage will not just be to COP26, but even more importantly, from COP26. We need to lay the platform now so that the injection of energy and purpose that we hope and pray COP26 provides can be quickly picked up and put into action. So it's in that context, knowing that the UK is hosting this most important gathering, that we also know we can only speak and support those who are bringing their own stories and demands if we have begun to get our own house in order. And that is beginning to happen. In June 2019, the Scottish Episcopal Church passed a motion at its General Synod, which included the action point, "There be formed an ethical investment advisory group to develop a strategy to enable the Scottish Episcopal Church to completely disinvest from unethical sources of revenue." And the motion made it clear that unethical was understood to include investments in fossil fuel extraction companies. And at its most recent General Synod last December, the Episcopal Church began the process of setting the challenging target of making our church net zero by 2030. It asked in that motion to be presented with the demands that that target would make upon us and the resources that we might draw upon to fulfill it at its next synod in June. And at that synod, with those demands and those resources before us, we very much hope that the motion will be passed, which commits us to meeting that target. I think it's really important that we're clear that both divestment and even more a target of net zero by 2030 are not straightforward, but we need to move beyond talking to action and an engagement with the knotty issues that each of them present. On divestment, the first steps are relatively easy. The Cathedral in September 2019 asked our investment managers to divest from any direct holdings in fossil fuel extraction companies, and that was done. A similar move was enacted by the Scottish Episcopal Church's Investment Committee, with the last direct holding in a fossil fuel extraction company being sold by September 2020. Those first moves on divestment enabled the Cathedral in September 2019 to sign one of the global divestment announcements that James just talked about. And since then, many Scottish churches and leaders have signed the Scottish Church's COP26 pledge that's been enabled by Eco-Congregation Scotland. Such pledges are vital in building up the momentum for change, because after the initial moves, we get to the hard part. Most of the Scottish Episcopal Church's funds and those of the Cathedral, because we're a very small denomination, are held in pooled investments. We're not like the Church of England, who have, as we've heard, somewhat of a policy of direct engagement. We don't have the funds to have that kind of leverage. Our money is pooled with lots of other individuals and organisations in ways that spread the risk and cut down on management costs. Such pooled funds, however, are more complicated, as the pledge acknowledges. The pledge envisages a maximum of 5 years to find ways to divest totally from fossil fuel extraction via those pooled funds. And more importantly, to invest in positive ways that will help underpin the green recovery and sustainable economy that we all want to see coming out of COVID. So we're in that task, along with the Episcopal Church as a whole, of finding the financial vehicles to enable us to deliver on that pledge. And what we find is, particularly in the cautious world of investment, that the vehicles for such investment are not readily available, particularly to institutions, as I've mentioned, like the Episcopal Church and the Cathedral, who in relative terms have small amounts to invest. It's analogous to the situation that many of us find ourselves in relation to pension funds. For many, that is effectively one of the largest investments in which each of us personally have a stake. But finding pension funds that are divested from fossil fuels, and not just from their extraction, but from the wider fossil fuel economy, is not straightforward. It's not yet mainstream. And that is the need for change. The Episcopal Church's Ethical Advisor Group is now doing the work of researching and recommending those positive investment vehicles. And we're working with other churches across the world on those. And the Cathedral will utilize that research too. But that research is about effecting a wider change in the financial services industry. That's what the move toward divestment, the signing of pledges, the withdrawal of direct investment is all about. It's being part of a wider movement that creates the momentum to effect change in what is a huge financial services industry, so that positive ethical investment becomes much more mainstream, much more available, much more part of the way all of us are enabled to operate, part of a huge shift in the way in which our economies as a whole are run. And the same is even more true of pledges to become net zero by 2030. By ourselves, such a pledge will probably be unfeasibly expensive to a small denomination like the Episcopal Church. The technological solutions are still not readily available, particularly to awkward buildings like churches. And if any of you know my own cathedral here in Edinburgh, you'll know that attempting to heat it by conventional means, as by sustainable means, is a real challenge. So committing to net zero by 2030 is about laying down a serious marker, but it's about becoming part of a wide movement. It's about getting other churches and, more importantly, wider society capturing the possibility and the challenge of that. So please do sign the pledge tonight if you're in a position to do so. Signal your desire for change. And in that way, we'll gather the momentum to do something about our carbon emissions in a joined up way, not piecemeal, which will be almost impossible, but together as a society, as a country, tackling it all head on. And at COP26, we will be asked if we have begun to rise to that challenge. And so we hope and pray that we can say we are.